Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Merpay Tech Fest. I'd like to share with you the story of the payment infrastructure that has been built at Merpay. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm called Host, which is my Slack name. I am a software engineer at Merpay, and I joined Mercari in November 2016 and participated in the launch of Merpay since then. I've been involved in the development of the payment infrastructure, and I'm currently the tech lead of the payment infrastructure or the settlement infrastructure team. I'd like to give yes, and first, this is the agenda. I will briefly introduce the settlement infrastructure, and then I'd like to talk about some of the domains. First, the vision of the payment or the settlement infrastructure team is to provide the best settlement infrastructure to the product team and to achieve the mission of the entire Mercari Group. So currently, we provide not only Merpay payment or the settlement function, we also provide our payment infra, like a Freema app, as well as a payment function for Mercari shop via our payment infrastructure. And in the middle, payment infra sits, which consists of 4 domains. And the front ones are the services in charge of the settlement processes, and behind that is the domain in charge of managing the wallets and the books of customers, and then the payment domain, which takes care of proceeds of the merchants, and then there is a domain in which takes care of a connection with external payment platform. So today, I'd like to talk first about the domain for managing wallet and books. So first, I would like to talk about the definition of a settlement or payment, which is a little bit probably different depending on the person's image or on the actual situation. So from a development standpoint, when we create the infrastructure, we define the settlement in this way. In economic transaction, we define the settlement or payment as the exchange and transfer of value by manipulating the wallets of the participants. Then, the first thing that comes out of this is the source of payment, which are the customer's wallets, which manage the value and the payment accounts. So in case of Merpay, there are 2 types of customers, individuals and merchants, and each one has different type of wallets. I'll give you some examples of the wallets for individual customers here. The top one is the internal payment account, the internal wallet. And so funds accounts, sales accounts, and free point accounts, which is for managing points, and Merpay provides a smart payment, which is a payment with a credit line, so they can have a credit account and a debt account as well. And also, customers uses external payment. They can have a credit cards already connected to the system and a connected bank accounts for debiting and crediting, which are also managed by the system. And in case of merchant's wallet, That is a partner sales account to which the money is accrued every time the payment is made. And this is the unsettled sales. And then after the payment process is completed, the finalized sales goes into this clearing partner sales account. And then, well, if the sales are processed as debt, then it goes into the clearing partner debt account. And as for the merchant's external payment accounts, basically the bank account is registered for debiting purposes, and it is managed in the system as well. So the next step is to operate each of these accounts to do the clearing. The value fluctuates when payment is processed and cleared, and it's important to keep track fluctuation. So therefore, I will talk about a management of books and ledger. The actual shape and design of the books may vary based on the purpose of bookkeeping. What this means is that, for example, a payment request comes in like this, and the payment after it is processed, then the payment system, if there is a change in the customer's balance, the system in the middle here, called the ledger management system, post the changes of balance. And the same kind of payment process data are also fed into accounting system and posted on the ledger in the accounting system. And with some accounts, due to the legal requirement, for example, for a fund account, the aggregation of debts and the credits for customers need to manage on a daily basis. Therefore, the requirement of the book is determined by the legal requirement. So the legal account bookkeeping is also done on daily basis. In today's session, we are going to talk about how the system bookkeeping works when the customer's balance is changed. The system books work like this. For each type of customer's account, there is an account of which balance is managed by the system using the balance item. It manages the detail of the balance. The balance item manages the detail of the balance. Each crediting of balance is managed as one record, and when the balance is used, which transition unused, the balance is tracked in the system and logged in the balance item. And the snapshot manages the status of a balance item based on the changes recorded in the balance item logs. Each of balance items is managed, so if you go back to one before, you can see how much balance changed at one point of time and find out the status at that point of time. That's how you use the snapshot. So that's how the system bookkeeping works. And next, about wallet and bookkeeping. So we are working on a new system, and we are trying to reduce the amount of that development as much as possible, amount of the coding as much as possible, and we are aiming to make it available to the product team as soon as a new account type is added without much coding. So the challenges are that, as I mentioned earlier, there are many types of internal settlement accounts. And in fact, if you look at the details, for example, in the case of fund accounts, there is no expiration date, but there are limits for consumption and overdue. And so no automatic creation. So it means that unless the customer applies for that account, it will not be created. On the other hand, for example, if it's a free point account, then it has an expiration date and it's automatically created when the point is awarded. So it's like this. Actually, depending on the type of account, the operation may change a bit. But so far, in the past, we've been modifying the logic of the system on the application side. And after the proper testing to avoid the negative impact to the existing behavior uh, is done, we provide newly developed account types. But now, in order to keep the cost of our development as low as possible, we are thinking of a new design that defines each behavior, such as no expiration date, as an attribute. And when the attribute is attached, the related behavior will happen. So when you have a new account type, by just configuring the attributes that already exist, you can create a new account type that can be provided to the product team. If you define the config properly, yes, new account types can be provided. So there were all about wallets and bookkeeping. But next, I'd like to introduce to move the wallets to perform the settlement process. First of all, I talked about the settlement processes. But yes, there are always participants. The participants include the individual customers, merchants, and Merpay itself. So when you look at it as a payment process or settlement process, for example, when a customer makes a payment to a merchant, the merchant payment process runs. And if the customer actually uses the wallet on the left-hand side to pay for the merchant services, the value of the payment can be transferred to the merchant's wallet through the merchant payment process. Also, there is a function of person-to-person transfer between individual customers, which is a kind of settlement process, and it's a transfer of the balance between individuals. And also, the payment processing between individual customers and Merpay, such as deposits and withdrawals or repayment of debts, and also the payment of sales between merchants and Merpay, are abstracted as payment processing and batches are created. And then when developing these payment processes, first, from a design point of view, how should we design them? Well, when we thought of them, how to model it, we have to think about four elements. First, who are the participants? And then what types of payment account for the payer and the receivers. And also, when it is made into a single payment process, shall we make it so that it can be done all in one action, or whether it has a multiple steps to process the payment? The type of payment and the type of the settlement account to receive the payment are determined by the type of payments. So we can open an app for each action. Depending on these elements, actual actions will differ, so the separate API for each action can be prepared. Let me use the next example. This is an actual being used in the Mercari escrow transaction. So this is a payment method called escrow payment. In case of Mercari, it's a C2C escrow transaction. So the participants are individual customers, individual buyers, and sellers. First, buyers can use their own payment accounts. When you buy something from Mercari, you pay for it first. And when that happens, create escrow process runs for the payment. And if it is successful, then the Mercari makes deposit to the merchant sales account. And then when the transaction is completed, and both parties have finished evaluating each other's transaction, we need to distribute the sales to the sellers. This is one of the actions of escrow. So we do that process, and then after that, the proceeds goes into seller's wallet.
Let me explain another example. This is a charge payment for merchants offered by Merpay. Usually on the front, we offer code payment, ID payment, or online payment. From the point of the payment foundation, basically, the participants are individual customers and the merchants who receive payment. Individual customers will be first provisionally processed using their available payment accounts through this create charge. After this provisional processing, the status of the payment is in the state of the provisional sales, and in this state, the sales is not confirmed to the merchant. Only the balance or credit held by the customer is being held down here. Then, when the next action of finalization is accepted, the balance of the customer's payment for the consumption is finalized and the sales is given to the merchant. Thus, in designing, we carefully consider the 4 points mentioned earlier and organize them accordingly. If the extended existing payment process can cover the required processes, we extend and apply it. If not, we develop a new process in abstraction. That is all for the design. So next, I would like to discuss some points from a development and operational perspective. So this is about the integrity assurance, which is always a problem for those who actually provide payment services. So let me explain what it means. When you do a payment processing, it is rarely completed within the same service. In the case of Merpay, since it employs microservices, when you make a payment, you need to interact with multiple microservices, or for example, when you make a credit card payment, you need to interact with an external payment service. If there is a failure in the external service on which we depend, or in the middle network layer, an unexpected error occurs. In this case, it is necessary to complete the payment process successfully or fail to roll back correctly. I covered the integrity assurance of the payment service in detail in my blog some time ago. So if you are interested in going over the details, I hope you could refer to my blog. Today I will show you roughly how we do it. This is basically close to Saga concept. Within a payment service, a state machine diagram based mechanism is created. So single payment process is divided into multiple states, each of which can be defined and executed as state machine. Suppose some error has occurred and it cannot be recovered by retries or other means. So we can define a state machine called rollback as a compensation process on the right. So the rollback process is called, and if by some chance the customer has already spent the balance due to a failed credit card transaction, we fail we fail this transaction to cancel all including the credit card transaction and the balance spent. That way, even when an abnormal error occurs, it can be automatically retried or rolled back if necessary, so that the integrity at the source from the customer's point and money's perspective is ultimately ensured. There is also a recent new approach to the payment integrity. I don't have much time for this session, but I'll give you a quick overview. The state machine diagram I mentioned earlier was created in the payment service, but since other teams have similar issues, we would like to carve this out as a general solution as an SDK. But when we provide it as an SDK, one point of the reflection so far is that in defining processes based on a state machine diagram, some parts were a bit unnatural for developers. We want to improve the programming experience there. So now in the new system, we are providing a workflow and interface like this so that you can build logic in a way that is relatively similar to normal programming. For example, as you see in the upper right, there is a certain workflow function that can be executed by passing it a parameter. If we look at the contents of that workflow, each of them is the same process as before. Each activity can be defined as a state and executed by passing activity functions and parameters. If this is assembled in a workflow function in a normal programming, a workflow is created that can be executed with the same assurance of consistency. On the back end, the workflow engine is saving each execution log. If it goes down somewhere, it can be rerun later, starting from that point. So, if a rollback is needed, the compensation process can be started in the same way as is described on the right. The last point I would like to talk about is the domain of merchant payment adjustment or clearing. From high level, this clearing has two parts, or adjustment has two parts, clearing and settlement. So, first, clearing. Clearing is the process of correctly calculating the merchant's unsettled sales or commissions and establishing them as the final sales. Secondly, settlement. This is the process of actually transferring the confirmed sales to the merchant, or if there is a credit, billing the customer for that repayment. This is the overview of the adjustment process. When a merchant payment request comes in from a higher layer, it is processed by the service responsible for payment processing. And payment events receive adjustment service from time to time. And if fee clearing is required, then immediate fee clearing will be performed, and the final sales is determined. And at the timing of that adjustment, the sales clearing process is also executed to finalize the sales. The confirmed sales is called sales settlement here. In effect, it is a wire transfer action where a transfer request is made to the merchant's registered bank account via the bank connection. One important point is that if the payment data that forms the basis of the adjustment is not correct, the merchant will receive the wrong sales amount. So we also reconcile data from time to time for important services to ensure that the original data is reliable. Regarding the reconciliation part, there is a new initiative that I would like to share with you. This was actually also mentioned briefly in last year's tech blog in Reconciliation Story. One of the challenges we face now is how to prove the integrity of the payment process. Here is the entry payment request. If there are multiple microservices used, including our payment foundation, after the processing, each microservice needs to be verified to ensure that it is operated correctly and it is operating as we expected. For this reason, we have been doing the reconciliation process between each microservices, as the slide shows. Each microservice performs reconciliation with its dependent services from time to time, either in batch or event-driven fashion. But we feel there are two issues that need to be addressed. Firstly, since there is no enforced reconciliation mechanism, if we forget to implement a batch in some microservices, there is a risk of incomplete confirmation on an overall consistency because the consistency of that part is not finally confirmed. Or even if all microservices were done properly, for example, if we want to check the consistency of a certain payment process or how the whole process went, we currently have to provide APIs to the related microservices to check them. We share the similar issues in accounting and auditing, so we want to obtain evidence to prove the overall consistency in one place. But at present, this is not available. So, as a new initiatives, this distributed processing tracing mechanism described below is being created right now. If you're familiar with the distributed tracing mechanism, this will be easy to understand. Usually, for example, when looking at a request, each request has a trace ID or request ID, which is then processed by each microservice or service. You can then attach a distributed span ID or something like that. And for example, with Datadog, you can check how multiple requests are processed across multiple microservices. Similarly, when a payment process is created, the entry service defines it as a processing and registered it to this processing tracing service. After you register, you notify the entry service number 2 in the slide that you are participating this notification. And we have them perform the first entry services, the task processing done in the batch so far, and the necessary dependent services, and then the results are reported if there are no problems. This is number 4. In the report you can see the results are okay, as well as dependent services of the entry services. So the reported service is now recognized as a participant and notifies the payment service via the same second event. And in the same way, when payment service receives notification, the same task processing as dependent services are processed and the results are reported. If there are any dependent services among them, they will be reported. And repeating such a process to the end, all participating microservices in the payment process will be recognized. You can also get a report on the result of the services process or the task results of the dependent service. Then, evidence that can prove the overall consistency, which is the second issue I talked about, will be collected in this processing tracing. Also, for issue number 1, common mechanism for processing will provide a more compulsory mechanism than before. I went a little over my time, but let me summarize today's session. First, we talked about the overall domain structure of the payment foundation and then introduced the design and development practices of several domains. Recent initiatives in each of these domains were also presented. That concludes today's session. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you indeed.
Good.